All right, welcome. First on the agenda is Gabby.
Okay, so the dedupe code, which is mostly done, is able to dedupe full RGW object, but we must maintain the head object on the destination. So let's say we have 10 megabyte object. It's going to have 4 megabyte on the head and then 2 tail object, 4 and 2. We can only dedupe the tail object, so we only save 6 megabyte and not the full 10. The reason is that the head object got attribute and which could be different between object. The most obvious one is name, time, and other such attributes. But we do have a mode when we use multipart when the head object is empty. If you have multipart, then you got an empty head and the data is all in tail object. So in this scenario, we got perfect dedupe. If you got, I don't know, 50 megabyte object, which is most likely to be in multipart, we're going to dedupe the full 50 megabyte. I think similar concept is used on object class when we have an empty object with object head with attributes and the data reside on lower class storage with the data. So the head is empty. So my goal is to emulate that behavior on common cases. So say we have the first case when the head object got the first 4 megabyte. So I want to split it into 2 separate objects. One, an empty head object with just attribute, and the second is just the data. I know how to do it on the OSD to split the object, and I think I can do it with very little cost. We have a mode in OSD called clone range, which could be applied without data. So you could clone the head object into temp without the data. So it's exactly the same, but there is no data. Then you rename the head object to something new. I don't know, tail XX. And you remove the attribute because it still have the original attribute. You remove all the head attributes. Then you go back to the temp object. You rename it to the original head name. And the tricky part, which I don't know how to do, is do some manifest manipulation to make this new tail object part of the manifest. So this is where I need help. And probably Casey, you're the guy to do that, or to help me here. Is it possible to add an extra tail object to an existing manifest and put it on the first position, or that it's going to screw up the whole manifest?
You have a problem before that. The bucket index is pointing to the head, and now it's a different one, right?
No, it's not a problem because we move the head into temp, and then we rename the temp to the original head name. So it's good. It's the bucket index name is going to be exactly what we have. So I know on the OSD how to take head object with embedded data, split it into 2 objects. One of them is just the head with no data. One of them is a new object with the data. That I could do almost freely, but I don't know how to edit the manifest to include the new tail object. I don't know if it's possible to use the object class style manifest, or that it require a new type of manifest.
From what I understand, it's not. I don't think it's a matter of type of manifest. It's that you'll have to rewrite the manifest because it has offsets, and all the offsets are going to be changed.
Yeah, I know, but the manifest usually it's like a script. So it's saying, this is the name, and that's the order. So, and I think the name starts from like 0 to n. Now, if I'm going to add a new object and it's going to be the first, it's need a number like -1. I don't know if it's possible to shift the numbering, because I don't want to go and change all the names of the existing object. And my understanding is that the manifest automatically just assume tail 0 is the first, tail 1 is the next, and so on. Because let's say we have tail 0 until tail n, and now I'm going to add a new one, which is going to be -1 or something equivalent. So maybe it could look like what's the word for this? Come on. When you do part upload, so we have their head does some kind of combination, and then you have all the parts with their own rules. So maybe we could take whatever we had and pretend that that's a multi-part. It's the second multi-part, and they're going to be another multi-part that we're going to add now. Is this something that could be done? Does it make sense what I'm saying? I know if multi-part, there's the head, and then you have all the multi-part from 0, 1, 2, 3, and each one of them is a container which define object internally. Can we pretend that the existing object belong to a multi-part, and then I can add a new multi-part before that? I don't know if that thing works or that we need a new style of manifest.
I think you're going to have the same issue with the object names.
Sorry, what do you say?
You're going to have the same issue with the object names. So even if you pretend that this is a multi-part object.
Why? Because every multi-part define their own domain. So in theory, the old names could belong to the second multi-part with whatever domain, and the new one could be part of the preceding multi-part with its own naming convention. But again, it's a very basic understanding of the manifest. I think Casey is the only one which really knows the manifest internals.
I mean, I've had to use the manifest for some stuff, but I wouldn't say that I really know it. Are offsets or stripe numbers part of the object names, or like is that? Yeah, I don't know whether or not you can insert something at the beginning without changing everything after.
So I definitely don't want to go to change the object. I don't mind changing the manifest, but I don't want to touch the object aside from the head object. Oh, who wrote the manifest? Is this Yuda? Matt? I don't know.
So I think you can experiment with what you said. So let me try to see if I understand your proposal. So you have an object, and what you're going to do, you're going to rewrite the object as if it's a multi-part upload, where the head object is the first part, and
It's not going to be the head object. What used to be that embedded in the head object.
Yeah, right. The what used to be the head object would be the first part, and all the tail object would belong to like a virtual second part, right?
So that's one possibility. I don't know if it's possible, but that's one way I was thinking of doing that. And I don't know how this thing is done with a storage class, because I noticed that also storage classes
Also, in case of storage,
got empty head.
storage class is for the case that you want an object to belong to a pool, which is not the default one, but the head has to belong to the default one. So we create an empty head on the default pool, and you create the rest of the tail objects on whatever pool that somebody asked you to use.
So it's just going to be an empty head, but the manifest is going to look exactly like the normal manifest?
Yes.
Okay. So it's probably going, so hopefully it's possible to reuse or extend the multi-part manifest. Otherwise, it might require a new style of manifest. But that requires, of course, that the code would always understand it. And that means that once you did it, you cannot go backwards. Because if you upload this manifest, then it's not going to be understood if you downgrade.
Right.
That's why it's...
Yeah. So maybe try to experiment with the idea that you proposed for like the multi-part manifest, and maybe that would work.
Who wrote the manifest? Who knows this code? Is this Yuda? Man.
Git blame would tell you.
Sorry. Git blame. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's moved around the code several times, so Git blame might not have the whole history. I don't know if it was Yehuda, but it certainly predated Matt and my team's joining the Ceph project. It's been around forever.
So Yuda is probably the first guy to, maybe he would just know who wrote it if he didn't do it himself. But what you guys think about the ideas, that makes sense to you? I know they always decided. I know I can split the object almost freely.
See, yeah, I don't think we should rely on clone range or mapping multiple object names to the same OSD. I mean, if you're reading the head object anyway, just prefetch its data and do a write to the new object. But I don't know if this complexity is really worth it.
No. I don't mean to save time on the read. I don't mean that it's going to have the same benefit of the embedded object that the read is done with one IO. What I mean is to save me the cost of copying the data elsewhere. Because think if it's erasure coding, I really don't want to start copying the data. If I can just split the object name and maintain the data, that's going to be much more efficient. So that's my goal. So now if you do the dedupe, there's zero cost on the read flow. But I'm willing to pay one extra hop on the read flow after dedupe. I think it makes it's not too much to ask.
So one thing that we said is that it's a question that we need to kind of maybe send to the users or try to verify from the field. So
which question? If they're
whether an extra hop on the read is worthwhile the saving on space. I don't think this is really for us to decide. So I think one of the things that we said is we're gonna first, use dedupe without this, like the suboptimal dedupe that only helps with large objects. and then try to gather information and see whether there is a real requirement to add this extra optimization.
I don't really think people would see it as a big.
Well, this is exactly what we should see.
No, but I can give them the option. So when they do the dedupe, I can give them options, say, read performance or dedupe performance, or I can give them the option when you do the dedupe if I want to split it. If I can do that, then I can give them, because everything is user initiated. So when you ask for dedupe, you could give it parameters, how you want me to do that. That's a very easy thing to do.
Okay. That makes sense.
I mean, I think there's still some uncertainty about how useful full object dedupe is going to be in the first place.
I know.
So it seems like we're spending a whole lot of effort on something that is kind of hard to make judgments on, I guess, especially when we're talking about trade-offs with normal IOs.
Yes, I think the trade-off here really something that most reasonable people would take. But as you say, how beneficial is the dedupe? So without this change, the dedupe might not be very beneficial because it is limited to object larger than 4 megabyte. With this change, I can go down to, I don't know, 64 kilobytes.
Right, but with the stats that you're giving, you're also giving stats for the smaller objects, right?
Yes.
So I think people can learn how useful is dedupe, how useful dedupe would be if it also does this empty heads. So, I mean, I think, and I agree with Casey here, let's see how this is received, how this is used first, before we go on and do some more development here.
I mean, there is going to be a development done by me one way or another. I don't see it as a big effort compared to everything else that is done here. So I really don't see why this is the point where we start to save on development time. There is a big development and it should be done in such a way that it's actually beneficial. Because by definitions, what we give them now is not going to be very useful. If I think about Inditex, for example, their data is smaller than 4 megabytes. So they're not going to do any dedupe, even so the data is duplicated. That's just one example. So, I mean, the problem for me is just the manifest. Other than the manifest, everything else is straightforward.
Yeah, so as for your question, I don't think anyone here has a very helpful answer for this specific thing.
So if I'm looking in the blame, it seems that Yuda wrote it. And I don't know who is this. Sorry. there is another name which, oh, Daniel Green.
Well, that's probably refactoring.
Okay, but Yuda is like on the first lines of code. So maybe I should reach out to Yuda to understand how complicated it's done. Because from my perspective, manifest is the one unknown part. The OSD code is straightforward. And there might be also another possible to do that, just using data sharing, cloning the object. There's so many things, so many ways to do things. Yeah, definitely Udo. He's the guy. And I need to understand is I keep hearing that we have to wait for customer input, but that's true for everything I do. And I keep trying to optimize the code. Even so, I don't know what the future holds for me. Because I suspect that without giving people a full solution, people are just not going to use it. So being that close to the full solution, I would like to finish this unless there is an inherent risk in this change. So that's the thing I don't understand. If you guys worry about development time or about some risk to RGW code.
Well, I would prefer not having to add a new format for manifests because of the versioning issues and just complexity there in general. But if you can find a way to prepend without changing the rest, then that would be great.
Okay.
I mean, I know that customers and potential users have been asking for dedupe for a long time, but I'm skeptical that full object dedupe is really going to satisfy there.
Some preliminary testing we've done on customers which gave us access seems to indicate a good potential for dedupe, but that was under the assumption that we do complete dedupe and we don't skip the head object, and that we are not limited to 4 megabyte and up. But again, I only got access to like 3 or 4 customers. I don't know what's the reality. I do hope that once this thing exists, people would actually give it a shot, and then we're going to have the more knowledge.
So, I mean, yeah, sure, there are going to be some clusters out there with large objects like container images or whatever being duplicated. But, I mean, maybe it would be good enough for RGW to just be able to scan and identify duplicates, and then, you know, users could just go and do a server-side copy to get the dedupe without us having to maintain a whole background process for it.
The background process depends on the amount of object. The identification portion is quick and easy. I don't think it's a pain. The dedupe process could be long and consume resources, assuming that you need to do dedupe. If you don't, then it's right. So it's like this. If you got billions of objects and you need to dedupe hundreds of millions, then you cannot type them by hand. If you find 5 objects which need to be deduped, the automatic process going to finish in no time. So it's everything that you could manually type means that it could be done from background with 0 time in seconds. But I don't think it's even worth the effort if you're just going to identify something that people can go and manually process. But again, I don't know what reality looks like. So I'm all set. There's nothing else I can add here.
Any other thoughts on this? All right, moving on. I just linked a PR for S3 control public access block. I had mentioned a request for this feature before and pushed a draft for it yesterday. It's passing the test there, but there's an open question about how to deal with conflicts between this S3 control API path and the S3 namespace, because we're serving them from the same endpoint. Our admin APIs have a similar problem in that you can't create a bucket named admin. So my first inclination was just to make this optional and default off, and people could opt in, knowing that there's potential conflicts. But there's also potential for us to use DNS names and route based on the host header. Still looking into the REST related code around this to see if there's a good way to do it. Maybe I'll follow up with more next week.
So I had a question exactly on this. So I don't really see how enabling or disabling this would help, right? Because if you need this API, then you would enable it and you still have the problem. I mean, my question is, can we say that we need a dedicated RGW just for the S3 control work?
That would be a way to do it, but it seems very wasteful, assuming that you would S3 control would get very little traffic compared to other APIs. I mean, in that case, you would have to do some kind of DNS routing to point at that special gateway. So if we could have the RGW process itself have smarts to know about that, then I think it would be better.
Okay, so the idea is to have another endpoint on the same RGW. That would be an S3 control endpoint.
it would be the same like front end listener sockets, but we would look at the host header to decide whether it should go to S3 control or to S3. There's a similar feature for S3 website where we have a config option, RGW DNS S3 website name, so that if the host header matches that, then we'll interpret it as website. So could potentially have a similar config option for S3 control.
Okay. So the websites, they can collide with what? Like if you just look at the URL.
Well, S3 website is a S3 feature, so you like create a bucket in the S3 namespace and then put a website policy on it, and that allows you to access it through a browser through that special domain name and see the website instead of hitting the S3 REST API.
Okay.
I was hoping that, because S3 has the virtual hosted bucket style, where bucket names are in the DNS name instead of in the path. So I was hoping that clients could still use the vhost style to access that special bucket name, v2018, whatever. But RGW actually maps that to a real path, and so it still hits the S3 control API. I think our handling of virtual hosted names happens at the wrong level. It applies to like all requests, not just to S3. So I would like to find a way to make it specific to S3, and so we could potentially host both from the same endpoint and just say you got to use vhost for conflicting names. That would solve the admin API problem too.
Right. Well, I mean, I understand that you don't want to split a new RGW just for the sake of S3 control, but the idea that this is a different host from the client's perspective makes lots of sense. I think it makes more sense than asking them to know whether something is a conflict or not and use the different format depends on that. Like I think if you look at how AWS are doing that, then they see that as a different gateway, regardless of the underlying implementation.
Well, yeah, AWS is going to use DNS names like s3control.amazonaws.com.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, ideally, we would be able to enable this feature by default, but any DNS-based solution is going to require custom config.
I mean, we can come up with some default way or default name that, for this API if we want to. I know, add S3 control to whatever host name that we have. So I agree that this feature should be on, but I think the concept of that this feature is a different endpoint from the client's perspective makes lots of sense.
Yeah. From a testing perspective, though, S3 tests only has a single endpoint currently. I guess we would have to add a separate endpoint for S3 control to the config file, but
I mean, this is solvable. This is not a reason.
That's less important than the user-facing stuff.
Yeah. I would need this S3 control interface for some feature development. I'm hopefully going to start on a couple other things. So
nice. Is that the access point stuff?
Yes,
or?
yes,
Cool.
the access point. Yeah. So and so again, in my mind, the client would assume this is a different place to send these commands to.
I mean, yes, but we also have, you would also say that about SNS APIs and IAM APIs and STS APIs, but all of those map to the same S3 namespace currently.
Well, true. Well, but I don't know. We made those decisions in the past. It just worked, and we didn't get into problems. But it's probably not the correct way of doing that.
Yeah, so maybe we can come up with a general solution and try to apply it in all of those cases, as long as we can. It seems like the only way to turn them on by default is to have them in the same namespace. So yeah, something to think about. I will also look into our virtual hosts code and try to find a model where that only applies to S3. But yeah, in general, if anybody's interested in this feature, there's a link to the PR. Could use reviews and whatever testing you want to do. That's all I've got. Next up, Yuval, your topic.
Yeah, this is nothing. Not too much about design. It's an issue that we've seen recently with Valgrind complaining about all kinds of things leaking when we're running the bug notification tests. The things that are leaking are not related to bug notification, but this is happening only when bug notification tests are being run. What I did in the recently is try to make sure that the shutdown of everything that has to do with bug notification is done properly, which means that there are no timers or any kind of coroutines that hang there and may cause the shutdown process to hang, and therefore the RGW to eventually not do a graceful shutdown, which could be interpreted as memory leak by Valgrind as. But I did, or at least according to the logs now, everything is shutting down properly, at least for the bug notification code. Everything closes down, like all the threads are exiting. There's nothing that remains stuck in a timer or any coroutine that gets stuck there. I still see the Valgrind issues. I actually see quite a bit of Valgrind errors that looks like there is something like there's a Redis handle with lots of things in it that is not being deleted. So I'm wondering, maybe it is a problem done elsewhere. I pasted in the Etherpad there's a link to the tracker. In the tracker, I've placed like all the complaints from Valgrind on the shutdown process. And it's just that if someone can have a look there and see if this looks familiar to them, you know, as for what is actually not being cleaned up there, because it looks like many things that are somewhat related to a Redis handle. Now, from the logs I'm printing, I don't see any non-graceful shutdown, at least on the bucket notification manager code. But this is very consistent. It's not a race condition or anything. It happens in each and every tutorial you run.
Yeah, that is strange. It's only the notification jobs still?
Yes, I haven't seen that anywhere else, and it's for all the notification jobs. So I thought, because I have like a background thread for Kafka and MQP, and there's a background thread for the HTTP client, but because the problem is seen across all notification tests, so it's not Kafka or HTTP or MQP specific. It's for all of them. So I suspect that it's not there.
Yeah, very strange. I downloaded the log of that run that you linked, and I do see it signals shutdown, and then shutdown completes like 4 seconds later, which it was taking 2 minutes before.
Right. Oh, I
Um,
mean, there were real issues with the shutdown process.
Yeah, so the log does show that those have gone away, and the very last line in the log is final shutdown, which is pretty much at the very end of main.
Mhm.
So it does look like, unless there are like static things that are still going outside of main, it looks like all of the shutdown is happening there.
Yeah, and I've checked to see if there's some shared pointer or something ref counted being used inside the bucketification code. So I haven't seen, taken from elsewhere. I haven't seen something like that. And again, if you look at the report of Valgrind, like it is all over the place, but it looks like there is something like a Redis handle with many things in it that was leaked.
Yeah. The very first one from create config store, that we should obviously be shutting down.
Yeah, I've seen there is a config store reference inside the bucket notification manager, but it's only a reference. And also there are things that related to the monitor connection and other things that has nothing to do.
I see a reference to site config. That is not the same as config store.
Oh, okay.
Hmm. Anyone have suggestions on how to dig into any of these leaks? Are you able to reproduce them with vstart by chance?
I am seeing a completely different set of leak when I'm doing that in VStart. I don't see these at all, but I see other. Maybe I didn't paste that. Maybe I'll add them. But yes, I see a whole list of leaks when running. Oh, I did paste them in comment number 10. They're also kind of related to the objector, but and this is the only kind that I see on VStart.
And do you only see that with notifications, or do you know if it happens in general? It's been a while since I
I
used
need,
their suppressions.
I will check that. No, I didn't check that without notifications, so I'm not sure. I guess my next step would be to start commenting out blocks of code and see what pans out. The problem is that because it's only happening, or because it's happening mainly in tautology, then it's a very long cycle to do this kind of work.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Anybody else have suggestions? How about final topics for the agenda? All right, hearing nothing, let's go ahead and call it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.